Well, there's DVR. This is how StreamYard works. I'm removing some, but I'm adding instead. DVR, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's up, Nick? Yeah, I'm a little early, which is not
Wow.
like me at all.
Right, I'm still getting used to this new look you got. Yeah, I'm used to like the light shining in from the right. It's kind
Hmm.
of a narrow hall, but look at this. I'm digging it. You're sounding good as always. And what are you wearing here? What do we got? What are we working with?
Oh, I've
You
got
have a
the
hat in a
Wisconsin
Wisconsin.
hoodie, like always.
Okay.
The Lake Elsinore storm hat, which I
Ooh.
think the eyes kind of they depict my mood most days. Like that's kind of how I feel all the
Oh,
time. So
that's not how we see you. We see you as this bright shining aura. But thanks a lot for being here, DV. I'm going to bring in our other two as well, Sammy Reid and Rudy Gamble. Thank you guys so much for being a part of PitchCon. And remember, everybody, we're doing this for a great cause in feeding America. So please consider contributing to it. Go to pitchwells.com/PitchCon. Hit that giant green contribute button. If you're having some trouble, just do it in incognito mode. That seems to work for everybody. So thank you all for being here, Rudy, Sammy. It's great to see you guys. And I'll let you have at it.
What's up, boys?
good to see you guys. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think Rudy's either on mute or the fact that DVR's voice is just so magical has just put him into permanent mute mode. Yeah, Rudy's done. Tough scene.
Broken. We'll get him back on.
Yeah, technical difficulties. DVR, how are you, bud?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How about you, Sammy?
I'm doing awesome. You back? You up here in the Bay Area or Northern California?
Yep. Getting
Nice.
used to my first Bay Area winter. It's pretty awesome. I probably underrated it in my mind, so I am enjoying every day of that. And yeah, Rudy's sound still isn't working. That's really weird.
Well, we'll just use his projections and we'll smash our drafts.
Did that work?
There
It
you
worked.
go.
You did it. Yep.
Yeah, I did this whole technological unplug plug thing. It's a really effective measure to do if you don't know why the fuck something's not working.
All right, so
Hey,
how do we?
there's no cursing here, Rudy. Okay.
Oh, I apologize.
No, I'm just messing around with you. Glad that you made it. I'm glad it's all working all right.
Well, I came prepared with the Fernando Tatis jersey, so
Nice.
yeah, gotta rep California.
Show me the shoulder. How's the shoulder?
Well, I mean, good enough to take me number 2 in the draft, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah. So I'm excited to do this panel with you guys. I think we want to talk a little bit about draft strategy, and first off, tell me a little bit about where you guys are putting the majority of your draft focus in when you're kind of prepping.
Go ahead, Rudy.
Yeah, I mean, so I've tend to specialize these days in just 15-team mixed snake. I found that the more formats I play, more pools I have to learn. My research just gets a little bit more inefficient. So it's been a couple years now. So I play industry leagues, I play main event, I play draft champions, things like that, but tends to be 15 teams. The way I kind of approach it is I've got a bunch of things I have to do for Razzball to get the projections out. And a lot of my focus is on playing time. So I'm basically learning the player pool that way, going through every team, knowing who's playing, but everything's blank slate. I don't look at baseball for 3 months. October to December, I start January. I'm working my way into it, but really starting from a blank slate. And throughout the month, building out the projections and then just testing little things, making sure everything's working right. And about now, let's say like Groundhog Day, I flip into digging into the draft board. So, for those that don't know, I run all the tools at Razzball, the projections. It's part of the season-long subscription. I actually give access to this draft room that I created for me because I found that I hate going into drafts and feeling like I'm making a decision on the fly. I think, one thing when I think through and I look at the most effective fantasy baseball players and you start going through it, and it's like there's not a lot they have in common other than they love fantasy baseball, right? And they're generally smart, but some are really mathy, some are not. Some are using computers, some are using graph paper. There's no, to me, there's one shared trait, and it's just effective preparation. And for me, where it went to is really thinking through how do I leverage things like ADP? How do I look at my projections and figure out the various paths to scripting a draft that meet my general goals and make as few decisions on the fly as possible, not get to that point where it's like 10 seconds on the clock. Like where it's like, I know at any pick, I'm like, I'm probably going to go with one of these two guys. And then if not, I've got fallbacks, but thinking through like almost as if it's almost like a learned improvisation of the draft. And I think all the great players do that. I mean, and some not so great players, but maybe they'll get there. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I hate mock drafting. I don't like to do real drafts and use those as learnings and that's kind of a practice league. Like I start and I've played Derek at it like mixed labor in like around mid-February, and I want to be like primed for that, but I don't want to draft before then. So I've pretty much set up a process where like it's as if I've drafted I almost want to be at the point where I've drafted 10 times, like almost like I go into my first draft as practiced as someone like Vlad or some of those other crazies that do so many drafts. So it's kind of, I guess, the goal going in, but I got to stop talking. What do you think? What do you do, Derek?
Well, yeah, I want to hear from Derek because not all of us make projections, right?
Right.
Some of us, lazy guys, just use other people's projections.
Yeah.
And so, Derek, I mean, what are you playing most these days, and how do you kind of prep for your draft and start feeling good going into draft one?
The first part of draft season for me, everything from November when NFBC draft and hold opens up through now, really is that 15-team format. So, NFBC 50s, maybe a 150. I'm not bankrolled to play a dozen of those right away and like feel good about it. I think I learn better by doing the actual problem solving with something in it, right? I think mock drafts were awful back in the day. As much as I like the concept of having that practice, it wasn't good practice because unless you were doing it for maybe someone's magazine and everybody in the room that night actually took it seriously, it wasn't really an exercise that was going to resemble the league you were going to play in later on. So to Rudy's point,
you mean those Yahoo mock drafts where everyone goes through like round 4 and then they're like, all right, I'm good.
Yeah, they just bail. Like those were totally useless. But I do think now we have a larger community of people that want to play really early, and you can start to learn more about the shape of the player pool early on and get a sense for how pieces fit together, how certain categories maybe run out at different points of the draft. Or for me, like I think the thing I'm exploring the most right now in my drafts is what happens if I double tap closers in the first 5 or 6 rounds of a 15-team draft? What am I losing later on? What else do I have to do in the early rounds around those closers to actually execute that strategy? What happens if I don't get any closers early and I have to just chase saves later? How many roster spots do I have to allocate to getting that category and what kinds of guys end up on the roster? So I think I go about the process of trying to problem solve, maybe similar to Rudy, even though I'd like to be a little more hands-on with going through the process of actually drafting before we get to the February industry leagues and the NFBC leagues in March, like the live in-person events and the auctions. Overall, I play almost every type of roto league, though. I play a 12-team mixer, a 15-team mixer, an AL only, an NL only, mostly for coverage purposes, just to get to the depths of the player pool. I like having a keeper league and a dynasty league because I think a lot of times we forget that keeper and dynasty leagues are also advanced prep for finding out who we're going to be picking up in redraft leagues later. So there's a little bit of long-term value that helps you in redraft just by playing in those formats and being a lot more familiar with those players before other people in the league start to see them for the first time in Fab or start to hear about them for the first time as they become big league ready. But it all comes back to this sort of like flowchart decision tree concept for me, where I want to know what happens. If I do X, what happens in the rounds after. And I want to battle test as many combinations of draft slot, positions in different spots as I can before I get to my most important drafts at the end of draft season.
I want to get back into that because I think it's a really important topic. But Rudy kind of mentioned kind of some of the aspects of the best players that he sees and what they have in common. I wanted to get your take, DVR. Do you see something very similar throughout all the best players, that even though there's many different strategic paths in the draft to take, something they all do the same?
I think they tend to be very flexible players. They're less likely to fall for their guys. They're less likely to jump several players at ADP or have in-draft FOMO where they start chasing and making mistakes. I think that's something that comes with experience. It also comes with not being afraid of certain players. Like, I think there's a mindset. Some people just don't want to draft old, boring guys, but I see rosters that Dave Potts and Lindy Hinkleman and some of the very best players we've ever seen build, and it's full of old, boring guys. So I just think they tend to be flexible and almost seem comfortable letting other people in the room make mistakes, because we learn year over year the ADP market is so far from perfect. You can take advantage of that if you're willing to be flexible with your strategy, but it's easier to be flexible with your strategy if you've gone through all the different possible builds or several possible builds in the run up to draft season in the first place. So yeah, for me, flexibility would be another trait that I see in players that are consistently finishing high up, either in my own leagues or even in national contests too.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, something we saw from Phil last year, and I think people are really going to be studying what he did because he had like basically the all-time fantasy season. But I think one of the things that was really missed that he did that Casey Cha did 2 years previous, when Casey Cha was just setting the NFBC world on fire, is these guys, they took a lot of different paths, like you said, Derek, early in drafts, right? They were not married to certain players early on in the drafts, but as you went later in the drafts, they really had guys picked out that they wanted in the middle teens, in the late, and the back ends of their rosters look so similar. And I think that's something that, you know, the more I played fantasy, the more I understand that almost taking more time on the back end of your draft and those players below like 150 or 200 in ADP, nailing that is almost more important than nailing the beginning. Because the reality is that all the guys at the beginning of the draft are pretty good. Yes, you can start off better, start off worse. You can take a little more risk. You can start pitcher, you know, whatever. There's different stylistic ways to go. But in general, all those guys should theoretically be solid contributors for the team. And sometimes when they're not, it's just luck, right? Oh, yeah, my guy got hurt. My guy blew out an ACL, Ronald Acuna, or something like that. But it's these guys in round 15, in round 20, in round 25. If you get gems down there, if you really pick apart the player pool and understand like your preferred breakouts down there, and you're able to get a couple, that puts you so far ahead than if you nail your first round pick. Like, everybody should nail their first round pick. So that's one thing that I think the best players do, and that's something that I've been really trying to incorporate more into my own strategy. And it's something that I think everybody else does it backwards, right? They spend more time on the first 5 or 6 picks. This is how I want to start my team. This is how I want to build my team. Great. You almost can't screw it up. Like, just pick some good players. But the reality is, if you hit on those late players, and we saw this, I mean, Casey Cha drafted, I think, Kettle Marte everywhere in 2019. You know, Phil was drafting Robbie Ray everywhere. So I think those guys, picking those guys out is really important. And Rudy, I kind of want to get your take on this from a projection standpoint. You know, usually these guys down here in the draft, they're going to be returning like $1, $0, -$. Yeah. How do you parse out who has better chances of breaking out, even though perhaps the projections don't necessarily say, oh, this guy's a great pick here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't go too much into kind of ceilings versus median. I'm looking at the value, and I'm willing to take chances on a bunch of players and different types of archetypes, especially any guy with speed and maybe a semblance of power, closers. But I do think, that I think when you think about your back half of the draft, you know, part of the prep is figuring out who you like there, and then that tells me who I might need to go for early. Like last year, I think I had Jake McGee on a lot of teams. Definitely not one you're doing too many victory laps on, but you know, when you have that cute, but yeah, I mean, it's Sagnoff. So yeah, I was like, I'll take one closer in the first 15 rounds. Because I was getting him in the 20th, 22nd round, and eventually moved up. But I still saw it as that. I saw he was the only option I saw in San Francisco. He'd have a pretty decent leash. That's kind of how it worked out. But before then, I mean, I could look at the beginnings of the draft and see, oh, I like these closers and these are values. Like to me, I can't figure out what the script is for the first 10 picks until I figure out, okay, who are the guys that would be like on just about every team, and just kind of game planning from there. So yeah, I'm on board with that, but I think that's all part of the effective preparation. Like a mock draft's not going to really help you there,
Right.
but like so it's almost like you want to go through all these so many different iterations and kind of this thought process of like, okay, let me do the double closer thing, and then you get to pick 15, and you go like, oh, I should have done this in pick 8. Well, just if you're doing it on your own and kind of mapping it out and being honest with what like NFBC ADP is, not using. I mean, if you play Yahoo or ESPN, use that. Play whatever is closest to your competition. But I think if you're being honest on that, you start kind of feeling where the player pool works for you, and you're going to have to give on something. And I think increasingly we found people are more willing to give on bats. They feel bats are deeper and aces are more scarce. And now relievers are going up like crazy.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting. I kind of want to get into the reliever discussion because I've seen a bunch of early drafts. Josh Hader's and Liam Hendricks is going in the second, third round right now. But I wanted Derek, maybe if you can expound on that. Rudy's talking a little bit about you don't like mock drafts. Rudy's talking about, I don't really like to practice draft. I don't want to do this. I'm like a notorious, like, let me burn $450 on DC so I can like understand the player pool before my buddy's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm just trying something new in this $150 league. What do you do to really prepare for getting into draft season? You don't like mock drafts. Obviously you're doing some of the industry stuff in February, but how do you kind of put together your strategy and understand that player pool, where that value is? Like Rudy's saying, kind of building backwards, understanding where you think the value is going to be later to help guide your first couple of picks. How do you kind of put that together early on?
One thing I've done more recently is I've started to look at the shape of a position over the course of the entire player pool, looking at like a projected dollar value over all the players each position are going to be drafted to see what is good late, kind of working backwards the way Rudy described it. That if there's plenty of shortstops, if there are 17 quality everyday shortstops, then maybe I'm not going to be as adamant about having a shortstop in the early rounds because third base runs out faster. So it's weird because I, for a long time, didn't think a lot about positional scarcity beyond catcher and how that would apply to a roster. But now I think you're starting to lean into this idea that you can end up with surpluses in playing time and you can do a lot better just by leaving yourself the right pieces to finish a roster off with later on. I do go through the DCs a little bit, Sammy, not as much as you do, but I need to see it. I look at other people's boards. I look at the ADP report. I pull that up. I always look at 7 to 10 days of what's been happening more recently to make sure I'm capturing what's been happening in the market. People keep consuming the new projections as they come out. They're reading sleeper articles. They're doing all the prep, and adjustments are happening. So I'm trying to react to what that market is doing. I always try to make sure I make a first run of my own personal rankings before any ADP report comes out, though, because I don't want what the crowd thinks to be a big part of what I think. Like I'll move on a player upon further review, but I don't want to just have a glorified ADP list as my foundation for figuring out where I'm drawing the lines at positions. And kind of think about that dollar value example. It's basically just tiering your positions a little bit and making sure that you're not going to miss out on something when the well runs dry.
Yeah. And so here, I have a question for you, Rudy, when it comes to creating projections.
Yeah.
There are a lot of players who would project well with playing time, and playing time is one of the key inputs into projections, right? But as we know, like, playing time isn't something that sometimes you can predict. There's injuries, guys step in. Sometimes a guy just outperforms what he's doing. All of a sudden the manager's like, hey, I like that guy. He's got a full-time job. How do you kind of weight that in the projections? You know, a lot of the guys down in round 25 or 28, you can't project them for more than 300-400 plate appearances. But if they did get more, they could potentially smash. How do you kind of weight that into your projections, or do you?
Yeah, no, I do in a way. So, but before I go in there, there was a point I wanted to make, and I'll forget it if I don't say it. That yeah, where Derek was saying where you create your own rankings and you see where the market's at, and there's one huge benefit to that. Like, and so this is how I do it because I've rationalized time like a person. I don't want to curse again. Say like, get Nick back. Like, please don't curse, Rudy. It was like there's going to be like maybe 20% that are underwater. They're guys that the market has rounds ahead of me. Like an example, like last year might have been like Lucas Giolito. It's like I'm not going to dig into him. Like I'm not like basically like snickering when people took him in the first or second round. You know, like there's that slight amount of FOMO from my like lizard brain, but the other one just like, look, I feel good on my projection system. I feel good on my process. I'm going to focus on all the guys that are either at ADP or values, and put all my energy there versus thinking of like focusing on the whole pool. So it's a great point that as you get later in draft, especially in DCs, but let's say like after the first 20 rounds, you know, I do like taking chances on guys that if playing time breaks, what, or even like batting order shakes out, like a guy that you think is going to be 9, but then it's leadoff. What I do is I have $1 for the normal value and then dollars per game. And what I'll do sometimes is like, and this is especially draft champions, let's say it's like halfway through the draft and you're already at the point where you're like, oh, I've got like starters that I'll play like 40% of the time, but they're awful. But maybe if they're in a really good matchup and you're starting and you've got a prospect or two and you're like, okay, well, what else do I do here? I'll filter by dollars per game and say like, I don't care, you know, like if they're on my sheet, they're projected for like a chance to play. And I'll start looking at guys that like pop up. Like that's how, I'll be honest, when I thought through things like, there's very few prospects I really get excited about. Chris Bryant was one, Acuna was one, Victor Robles was one. So shout out to Meatloaf. But a lot of it was at dollars per game and being like, okay. And then I mean, I know some of the components in there where it's like, okay, well, I'll probably project the Victor Robles to hit bottom of the lineup. You know, Acuna and Chris Bryant, didn't need to be as conservative. When they were coming up, they're going to hit top 6. But it gives me a chance at their ceiling. And yeah, between that and any guy with speed potential. But I'd say like, yeah, when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the dollars per game. For hitters, I'm really focused on, do they have an elite power and an elite speed tool? Not really. Like the elite bat tool is just awful. Like it leads you to like, yeah, like when you get guys who are good at a lot of things, like that has not done well for me. It's thinking like, are they one of these two great things? Like, and then for pitchers, I mean, you're kind of looking maybe at like kind of Ks and whip and things like that. But I'll be a dollar per game. It's going to be harder for pitchers in that case. So much gets into kind of scouting and preseason, and like hearing a guy is like, oh, he's really looking good, because the pitcher projections. There's only so many guys that are like look great, are healthy, and have like a shot to even like have a real role, not like a Tampa Bay share role.
Shane Baz, baby. No, I think that's an extraordinarily good point. And DVR, I'd like if you could talk a little bit about that. Something that Rudy said is, and he said it twice now, so I'm sure it's very important, is that he wants guys late in the draft that have either a speed tool or the potential to get steals. And that kind of leads, you were talking about positional scarcity before, a little bit of statistical scarcity. So we talk about what's going to be available later in the draft, and then I think even a point beyond that is what's going to be available in Fab. What have you found are kind of the most available things in Fab, or the least available that don't come into the league that you really need to make sure that you leave the draft with or spend early round capital on?
Yeah, I feel like you can find saves in Fab, so you can't say that saves aren't available. You just have to pay so much to get them that you can start to hurt yourself pretty badly and start to lose out on fixing other parts of your roster if you end up with other categorical or positional needs. So
God, chasing saves is just like the stone. I mean, there's also some emotional equity that goes with it, right? It's just
always be closing. Like if I have, I'm fabbing closers if I have 3 on my roster. I have 3 active closers. I fab a 4th.
Yeah.
And
but you don't have to spend $250 on Julian Merriweather.
I would not. No. I mean, it sounds like a sociopath in like an 80s or 90s movie.
Well, and a lot of that, I think, depends on what you've got. I mean, you might have 3 sources of saves right now, but one of those sources of saves might be part of a committee. One might be filling in a situation where the guy's coming back in a week or 2 and he's not going to get saves anymore. So you do have to think about 2 or 3 lineup periods from now. And I think part of that is having enough flexibility on your bench to have that extra reliever that you're not necessarily going to use right away too. Some of that's good fortune with health. Some of that's just managing the roster and having multiple position eligible guys. I think finding steals in season is hard for me. And I don't know if it's because I'm always skeptical of the players that end up popping up that can provide speed, because they tend, in my mind, to be more of like utility types or
they tend
outfielders.
To suck. They pretend to. I mean, Rudy will hate them because they end up, giving you negative value, even though they're a positive in steals, right? So I'm sure.
Except when John Birdie steals 4 bases in a game in the last week.
Buddy, I fabbed and dropped John Birdie at least 3 times last year, and let me tell you, it's not a ride I want to get back on. But
no, it's true. I mean, the category stuff's tough. But I would say like that actually points out that when you write for a site, like you could say what you do, but a lot of what you have to do is like you're consulting, like act as a consultant for all your visitors, and like we were talking about like I was saying those shared traits of successful drafters. Well, the reality is like because the only one I see is that they effectively prepare. There's people that just hate pitchers early. There's people that love pitchers early. I feel like a lot of what happens is that what we don't talk about a lot is that when you're drafting, one of the most important things is what are your skills for in-season management? What are your strengths and weaknesses? I came up with the longest acronym in the industry called Darwinism, called drafting a roster which integrates needs of in-season management. I had to read that.
My God.
Yeah.
My God.
Braswell intern held a cue card.
Of acronyms. It's very impressive.
It's real. Yeah, and I mean, it's a cool one too. Like, like Darwinism, you're like, okay, yeah, I'll give you that one. So I think as part of your preparation, if like, it would be like, well, think about what you're strong at for in season, think about what you're weak, and drive that into your drafting. Like to me, like the people who are really into pitching, and if you're good at it, okay, well, maybe figure out ways to invest less than in early pitching if you're so good at it, and stock and go with the bats. If you're really good at identifying closers, then pay less. And I think you do it naturally. And I think a lot of times people that have these kind of ingrained biases, like which is not me, but like would be heavy hitter or heavy pitcher, they've spent the last couple of years scavenging for the thing their teams are weak at. So they're now better at scavenging for that than the other. So you've almost set yourself up for like, well, if you want success this year, you probably have to do the same thing you've been doing because you've actually gotten good at the in-season part. But if I was to tell you, if you have a longer term view, I would say the way I would view in-season management is simply every week I want the best value, which would be like the best player for the next week and maybe rest of the season that I can get cheap, that I don't have to spend $200 on. And if I want the best player available, that means that if I stock up and let's say have a team that's huge on power, well, then that power bat is going to be kind of stupid for me to roster. So I don't want to over-index on power. I don't want to do it on speed because, while there's not a ton, there's always those 15-15 guys. Like I remember like Rafael Ortega last year was kind of had a little bit of value in there. It's like a sneaky value that you see his name again in March. You're like, oh yeah, probably not going to draft him. I mean,
that's the guy you pick up, not the guy you draft.
Right. I'm not going to marry him. I mean, that was just. I mean, it was a
date him for a little
it was
bit.
a Thursday night. I don't know, or I guess it was a Sunday night. But yeah, that. So I pretty much am destined to always kind of balance my drafts because that way I don't. Yeah, I could just always be fabbing every pick, and so I know I remember spending $40 on Rafael Dolis last year with 3 closers on the roster. And I'm like, for $40, I'll do it. And I mean, I think it worked out for like a week or two. Romano came back earlier. But because, when it suddenly becomes like July or August, you're like, oh my God, now I'm down to 1 closer. It's like, if I could have 4 closers going in May and stock that up, fantastic. Less pressure.
I think that leads us. I mean, we're like halfway through here. I think we need to start talking some specifics. And I think there's no better place to start than what we were talking about is closers, right? And you're talking about saves right now. DVR, I need some early closer takes because I think for the longest time, at least me, I've been pretty ingrained not to spend elite capital on closers. And I still kind of feel that way. But I do see some very sharp people taking closers now in the second, third round, those high level guys. And certainly the closer landscape has changed over the last couple seasons. We're seeing significantly less closers save 35 games. We've gone to a lot of committees, just like in football. We're seeing a lot of running back committees. The guy who gets 20 to 25 carries a game, very, very rare. And I think we're seeing the same thing out of closers. Does that change how you're approaching closers? And are you an early round closer guy?
So I have been an early round closer guy for a while. I think this year in particular, I'm more aggressive about it. And the reason why I'm comfortable with it is because I feel like hopefully not spending a lot of fab in season chasing saves is going to be good in that it lets me lean into streaming pitchers. And I think streaming pitchers is more important for me building the roster this way because I'm waiting on starting pitching a little bit if I'm getting those early closers. I'm going after Shane McClanahan and Shane Boz and Justin Verlander and Noah Syndergaard and this group of pitchers that have really nice ceilings, but a ton of downside risk in the form of innings or maybe just not coming off the injuries as well as they pitched prior to going down. I want to make sure I'm positioned to go out and fix that problem. And I think it's cheaper to fix that problem, to find the extra pitching you need on the wire than it is to find those saves over the course of the season. So that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make right now. But I'm also willing to go through and accept the fact that if I'm in a snake draft and I'm sitting at one of the ends and a run happens and I don't get exactly what I want, I'm not going to reach. I'm not going to bump someone I don't trust up into the 6th or 7th round just to feel a little bit better about the save situation. In that case, I'm willing to go ahead and start targeting some of the guys I like in the middle, the always reliable Mark Melancon. I'll go after a guy like that as my first closer if I get shut out on the Hader Hendricks run at the very beginning or the Iglesias, Presley, Diaz, Class A group. Like I've got buckets of players that I want to get, and I want to get probably 2 out of my top 8 if everything goes well. But there's plenty of rooms where everything's not going to go well as more and more teams actually want to execute the strategy. I mean, it becomes a lot less effective when 10 people out of 15 people in the room are trying to get 2 of the same 8 or 10 players.
So this is actually really interesting. I'm not an early round closer guy at all. And yet last year I had this main event team, right? And I got out of the draft with good closing and the guys stuck. And so I didn't have to spend a bunch of fab chasing closers all year. And let me tell you, dude, it was glorious. It was amazing. It was like the best feeling I've had since Well, I can't swear on this thing either.
Yeah.
It
But
was like flying first class. I've never actually done that, but I imagine that's what flying first class is like.
seems great. It was amazing. And I did where my holes was at the back end of the pitching staff. The starting pitching, I had some good frontline guys, but at the end, it was really thin. And so I spent Fab all season streaming starting pitchers. And the reality is that those streamers actually cost quite a bit less than closers do. Yes, closers do come into, the leagues, but everybody's jumping on them because everyone sucks at saves. Everybody needs a closer. Like Rudy said, even if you have two good ones, if there's a third one out there, you better go get them. Everybody's bidding on those guys. And especially early in the season, they're all going 3 figures plus. And so going after closers costs a lot more, and it hurts your soul a lot more than going after, Johnny Cueto is facing Colorado. Yeah, I can get him for $15. No big deal. So it costs a lot less. Rudy, I'm interested. So I guess what I'm saying is I haven't followed your strategy, DVR, but I kind of lucked into it last year, and it was really great. and I see the benefits to it. Rudy, I kind of wanted to get your take on this because saves are something that generally will come into the league, that will be available on Fab. But again, they cost more and they're a pain in the ass. So how do you kind of negotiate those in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to be what the equivalent of hero running back for RPs. I'd like to get one in the first 10, not in the first 5 rounds. And it tends to be 1 or 2 guys that I feel like have some value. Last year, it was Ryan Presley. I thought, everything was there. I didn't really see a major difference between him and some of the guys going earlier. I mean, Hendricks and Hader had fantastic years, definitely delivered on that. But Presley totally delivered for where you drafted him. But I'm not super anxious about it. I think I've generally had success getting, sometimes I'll draft relievers in bulk after rounds 15. And it's a bit of a spray and pray approach. Like McGee, I felt good about last year. I think I lucked into Reyes in one draft. But, well, I mean, it wasn't luck because we drafted like 3 or 4 closers. But
sure, but those
it
guys
was literally out of
there,
like.
Right?
But I think it was
available way late. Melanson was available way late. Reyes was available way late.
Yeah.
A guy like McGee. So
right.
You're scavenging. You're trolling the waters there late in the drafts.
Well, the key is like again, thinking with in season in mind. Like, so think about what you're drafting in rounds 15 to 25, and then think about what the first week or two of Fab is, and it's not going to be like, oh my God, that starting pitcher that I'm getting from 15 to 25, if he doesn't get drafted somehow, trust me, he's not going to be the biggest thing on Fab. Like, it's always like, oh my God, a reliever goes from, like, I mean, you saw what happened to Julian Mayweather last year. It was kind of comical.
Yeah.
He did look great, those 2 saves. So there's so much value there. It's so much instant ceiling. But what I like about it is I'm always fabbing. So it's like I draft 5 or 6 relievers. I'm going to know opening day or after the first week who just were failed bets, and there were plenty. Maybe Amir Garrett was one. Oh, there were so many.
Amir Garrett was one. Remember when he struck out 9 guys in 3 innings in spring training?
And then there's ones
like
right, and there's ones in like they were right, but they didn't, like Gregory Soto, where you just couldn't stick around with it long enough. But it's tough to bank all my saves on that approach. So, I could see paying up for one. I haven't really checked too much. I'm looking right now. There's usually one. I've also liked going with the bounce back guy in the past. I think Craig Kimbrell's worked for me twice like that when he's given people scares. It's just like, it's I'm not sure who would quite qualify the year. I think Edwin Diaz, I remember I had a share or 2 last year. But yeah, I don't like it. I'm interested because it's really good players who are doing the whole RP thing. I don't think it's quite my style.
Well, like we said, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? But let's talk about some more specific.
Don't skin cats, people. Nick, get on here. He's talking. This is.
Rudy, are you on Team Cat?
My cat infuriates me, but I still am not for skinning it. I mean, there's very little. What am I going to do with a cat skin? And then I got Mr. Bigglesworth running around the friggin' house. It's not worth it.
Rudy is on Team Cat. Look at him. Okay, DVR, I want to ask you a little bit. So obviously there are different paths to go, and you do like getting that early round closer. Tell me a little bit how you're seeing the 2022 draft shaping out. First off, I mean, it's like late January. Have you done any drafts yet? Like important ones?
Nothing overwhelmingly important yet. I think there's a little bit of a funky kind of dead spot in the 3rd and 4th round with some of the starting pitchers. I think there's a lot of risk, guys that have jumped up for the first time that I want very little to do with. Like I'm not here for all-time high price Robbie Ray. Like how much room for profit is there if Robbie Ray is going to the 3rd round? Like last year was the year. If you had Robbie Ray last year, you're awesome. If you have Robbie Ray in the 3rd round this year, you're probably not awesome. So there's a couple of little quirks like that early. In addition to, I think, some like star level players of just a year or two ago falling into this like early middle round cluster. It's like the Cody Bellinger, Christian Yelich. even Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant lives there, and Chris Bryant was pretty good last year. We don't know where he's playing yet, but I just can't quite figure out why those guys are hanging out there as often as they do. Alex Bregman, I know is coming off surgery, but he kind of fits too as a guy that if we knew he was healthy, he'd probably be going 2 or 3 rounds earlier easily. And the potential is off the charts for what he could do in every category except for steals. I mean, that's an incredible player to get on the fringes of the top 75 or 80. So I really like the bats that are falling into that range. Maybe that's another reason why I'm into at least one early, if not 2 early closers, because I feel like I'm getting 3rd, 4th, 5th round bats in the 6th, 7th, and 8th round this year. I think there's a lot of interesting buying opportunities in starting pitching once you get closer to that round 10 range. I have been all over Verlander. I mentioned Boz earlier. I think Sonny Gray, if you need a bulk guy to sort of balance out some of the higher risk pitchers that you might like, he could end up in a better park. He could end up leaving Cincinnati. That's entirely possible. Either way, I think you're getting 170 innings, good ratios, plenty of Ks. I just think there's these pockets of value that are consistently there. I don't know how much it's going to change between now and opening day, whenever the hell opening day ends up being. The other thing that I've noticed too is that you have some everyday guys who really don't have anyone pushing them for playing time that people are undervaluing. For me, that's guys like Matt Chapman. He's going to play every single day, no matter what, whether he's in Oakland, whether he's traded somewhere else, his situation could get better. Ryan McMahon, they don't have anybody in that system who's coming up to push him out of everyday playing time right now.
And even if they did, they wouldn't play him.
They wouldn't play him anyway. They just up and down him, bench him,
He's got the PT.
So I see these patterns that are just holding pretty consistently so far that are really, really good. Now, I think the thing that I'm really not sure of, and I'm curious how you're going about this, Rudy. Do you feel like batting average continues to be a category that's impossible to make up ground in later on in drafts? That seems like it's true most years. I don't see late batting average that I like, because usually you need a guy that's actually going to play every day for that to matter. And usually the late sources of batting average have no power. So they hit the bottom of the order. So they don't score runs. They don't drive in runs. And I kind of feel like the hitting category I've had to prioritize more than ever before is batting average in the foundation, even more than speed. Like, yeah, I want speed too. I'm not ignoring it, but I don't want to take on mediocre batting average players in my foundation because I can't take advantage of the actual power hitters like Chapman later on who bring on batting average risk, but a surplus of playing time and plenty of power to help me make up that ground.
Yeah, no, I tend to try to bank batting average early, so I have a little more flexibility because you don't find it there. And I mean, and when you're looking for a specific category later, I mean, yeah, the batting average guys tend to be unicorns. Like I remember there was like the Luis Arias strategy. Like, okay, well, I get him in the 15th round. And it's like, but what if he's not there? There's no other guy.
I had so much Arias last year, by the way, because I was chasing, and I mean, I think he ended up with like 2 homers and 2 steals. But every time he got one, the guy has 0 category juice, and every time he got one, I was like texting all my friends, like, Urias stole a base. This is incredible. But I mean, the reality is the guy sucks aside from batting average. It's true.
Yeah. No, I mean, Rod Carew's lucky he was born earlier. Well, he did steal when he was young. But yeah. So yeah, I think when planning out that beginning of the draft, it's like you don't want to be chasing. I mean, yeah, average is the toughest to make up, and strikeouts, because if you're not getting strikeouts from your top guys, that's why it's always tough getting a guy in your first 3 or 4 starters that's like quite mediocre in strikeouts, because it's like, you're going to have to go with what were the Robbie Rays, but also the Matthew Boyds, and like there's a whole bunch of strikeout guys. When you start seeing the guys that are left as rounds go on, you're like, wow, that's going to really hurt my ERA and WHIP.
It's like the power guys with low batting averages, who are also in surplus. And I actually want to throw out some stats. I did some really deep research for you guys here, but we're talking about average and steals, right? Over the last, so I just looked at 2021 and 2019, obviously COVID truncated 2020, but over those 2 seasons, there were only 11 hitters total that had 10 homers with 25 steals and a 275 plus average. So basically I'm looking at guys that had good steals and good average and at least like more than 0 power. There was 11 of them total in the 2 years. And then Rudy's talking about pitchers that strike guys out and don't suck at ratios. Guys over the last 2 years that had 200 or more strikeouts and a 105 whip or less. So this is a pretty, just open discussion. 15 of them total over the 2 years combined. So we talk a lot about position scarcity. We're talking now about statistical scarcity. But I really think when I'm looking early in drafts, these are the kinds of players that you want. They can provide like these things in combination that are going to be extremely hard to find later. Steals are hard to find. Average is hard to find. This is a reason that I was really in on Starling Marte last year, and I'm actually pretty happy to see that he's going in the like 3rd-ish round again this year, because he's one of those guys. He doesn't blow you away in a lot of categories. I don't expect him to steal 45 bases plus, but he's a guy that generally hits 280 plus and steals bases. How often are you sitting there in June and you're like, crap, I wish I had a guy that did that, and you cannot find them. It's just so important. So when I'm looking early in the draft, I'm looking at these scarce resources, things that I just don't think can come into the league. And to your point, Rudy, I think guys who strike guys out and don't suck in the ratios, they're hard to find, man.
Yeah, and I mean, one is like, you're trying to bank that early, and if you can get the guys with batting average and speed, that's a nice combo. Yeah. I mean, I think it is tough if you don't get those early, no doubt.
So I want to get a take on a specific player. I'm breaking away from draft strategy here. But I think of a specific player, Alberto Monteci. He's been one of the most polarizing players over the last couple of years. And I continue to really like the guy because he provides something, or at least potentially provides something that no other player can do. There is no other player in the major leagues who, if he played a full allotment of playing time, could hit 20 homers and steal 60 bases. It doesn't exist. But he has a pretty poor batting average. I'm sure he projects, again, to have a pretty poor batting average. He's getting pushed by a guy like Bobby Witt. If and when Witt comes, it take away his playing time. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. How do you – it's not even about Mondesi per se, although I think he's a really good example. But how do you guys balance a player like that whose upside is so tremendous that if he stayed healthy for a full season, it would be a complete smash show? But – his median projection probably doesn't justify where he's going. And he's not like a late draft pick. I think he's, 4th, 5th round this year. DVR, I kind of want to get a take from you on like this kind of player archetype.
I'm okay with building with a player like that in the foundation if I am really stable with kind of high floor other early rounders. I think there's something different about Mondesi this year that I don't know if I've really dug in enough to other people's takes on this, but Mondesi as a third base eligible only player is a little weird because if you're banking on him to provide speed from there, like it's not like when you lose a speedy outfielder and you can go get your Rafael Ortega or that fourth outfielder that does run a little bit. Like you're not going to find someone in the lineup who's going to take that spot and give you speed. And you might be able to move pieces around because of multi-eligible guys and cobble it together that way. But I do think that's a little strange not having him as a middle infielder this year, at least to begin the season. It's really build specific. The ADP the last 2 weeks in the NFBC is about pick 60 for Mondesi. So end of the fourth round of a 15-team league.
Yeah.
The playing time risk is a little bit real. I guess I'm more inclined to draft someone like Byron Buxton instead. Similar profile in terms of injury risk. Team's a little better. I think the injury risk is comparable. I just think it's easier to replace an outfielder. And I think that actually makes a difference when we're talking about a high-risk player like this.
Rudy, you got a take?
I mean, I'm literally looking at my draft room, and I have Buxton and Mondesi at exactly $20.10. And so I have them, and their ADP is about the same.
Okay.
I think that's as good a reason to lean Buxton. Plus the fact that I think Buxton has a chance of hitting cleanup or like middle of the lineup where,
I don't think Mondesi does, really.
He really shouldn't. But, the third base is just, it does. And with Bobby Witt coming in, I feel like you got to build around him. I've done that. I've won leagues or second place or something with like a 5th round Billy Hamilton. And Billy Hamilton's was a worse player than Mondesi.
Buddy, I chased that dragon for years.
Yeah,
you could have a T-shirt for that. If you won a league with Billy Hamilton in the early rounds, you deserve at least a T-shirt, if not some kind of trophy.
It was. It was a rush. But 4th, 5th round is where, it's an interesting one for a 4th, 5th round turn. Assuming how you started with like one or some solid bats, it could work with some builds. It's a tough one to like kind of structure your draft for that. But I'll be honest, I don't like the risk is really injury driven. I guess this is the first year where there's a little bit of playing time, but Merrifield could always go to center field. Maybe Nicky Lopez isn't
Kyle Isbell.
He could go back to singing like background vocals in a Prince cover band. This
would not be a Rudy appearance without
Nicky Lopez. Like that. Yeah. So they've got. So I don't. I think if Mondesi's healthy, you give the guy some run. So I don't mind it. I don't think his injuries are as. Last year was just what was it? I don't even remember at this point. Was it shoulders?
Dude, he
what
hurt
wasn't
one
it?
Oblique, then another oblique, then another oblique. He was just the guy was a struggle. But I remember a young shortstop who really rated extremely well over if you just like partitioned it out over 162 games. He was like a 1st round player, but he only played 114 games a year. And people were like, this guy shouldn't be a 1st rounder. Today's the number 1 pick. It's Trey Turner, right? All Trey Turner needed was health.
Yeah. Ian Kinsler was like that too. I think Paul Molitor was like that.
So these guys, I tend to gravitate toward them. Yeah. I'll tell you guys a story. So my first main event that I went and did live in Vegas, DVR was there. It was 2019, and we went to Mike the Mouth's party at the Bellagio or whatever, and we're out smoking cigars and whatever on the patio overlooking the fountains and everything.
There's no COVID.
No COVID, no masks. It was a simpler time.
You're just worried about all the other stuff you'd catch in Vegas.
It's a different world.
I heard it stays in Vegas, so it's not an issue anyways. But I'm out there with Rob Silver, and the draft is the next day, and I'm telling Rob, I'm going to draft Yu Darvish tomorrow. What do you think of that? It's the 9th, 10th round. You got to remember, Yu Darvish had been hurt for years, right? Nobody liked Yu Darvish at this point. He goes, Sam, I like that. And I'm like, really? I'm like, you're not just BSing me. He goes, no. And the reason is this: Yu Darvish only needs one thing to go right for him to return value. He just needs to pitch. That's it. It's not a like a
It did sound like Rob Silver, by the way.
Totally.
You nailed the cadence. Nothing else, but you nailed the cadence.
A+ cadence.
Yeah. But I mean, that was really a point that that has really stuck with me. He's a player that only needed one thing to go right for him. His level of performance, if he played, was not really up to question. It wasn't like, oh, he might need playing time and he might not be good. I'm just thinking of somebody like Gavin Lux.
Or last year, Ohtani. That's what we should have been thinking.
Exactly. Sorry, we actually only have a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask you guys about Ohtani, right? So we're talking a little bit about batting average and how important it is to get it early in the drafts. And I think of some really elite power speed guys that are going in the first round, J-Ram and Ohtani. And they are both really elite power speed guys, but they don't necessarily help you in average. They don't kill you there, but these guys are not necessarily like 280 plus hitters. How do you guys value them? If you're there with the third or fourth pick, are you taking Ramirez? If you're there with the sixth or seventh pick, is Ohtani your guy? Knowing that you probably need to, in a 15 team, you don't have to get a pitcher on the way out, but you might be screwed if you don't. How do you negotiate those guys that are like so good but don't give you batting average? DVR, I want to hear your take on it.
I mean, I'm definitely looking for a 290, 300 sort of hitter within the next bat that I get. And I'm okay like waiting. It could be Tim Anderson, right? Like Tim Anderson might be there in the third or early fourth, depending on how many teams are in this league. You have to have an early counterweight for that. I think I'm willing to try it because you're talking about players that are great in power and very good in speed. And the run production is going to be there. There's zero question about role. Ohtani's a little trickier because did he max out his plate appearance volume last year? Is there any world in which Shohei Ohtani can top 639 plate appearances? Is even that likely that he repeats 639? Like where do we fall on his final 2022 actual playing time count? That's the only thing that I worry about with him that I'm not obviously at all worried about with Jose Ramirez, who will play until he can't, basically.
Yeah, I tend to be on your side of it. I mean, on one hand, he's maybe the best player in baseball, just overall, which is really incredible to have on your team. But I tend to side a little bit with you that I do shy away from players that don't necessarily hit for high batting average early in the draft. And, buddy, I mean, passing on Shohei Ohtani is not a place I want to be. But, I think of a guy like Bo Bichette, who I'm pretty sure that J-Ram's going ahead of Bichette. I think I might take Bichette ahead of him simply because of the batting average gains, even though I trust Jose Ramirez more. I think overall he's a safer bet. I just think when it comes to batting average, man, I need to get a guy like that. I feel the same as you, DVR. I have to get a guy because if you don't get it early, you're just not getting it at all. Rudy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I probably have to go through a bunch of draft permutations to see, but yeah, it's like I would have to compensate for that pretty quickly. That starts, like there could be guys in the fourth, fifth round that I really like that are a bit weaker on average. Like that starts factoring into your speed play because you're like if a guy's available, outside the first 3 rounds and he has speed and his power doesn't kill you, well then his average is probably bad. There's got to be something, some wart. So yeah, I kind of like having the most outs possible per draft pick.
Yeah.
So
I think that's sharp. And you were talking about DVR that Shohei was probably at the top end of his range in terms of games played, in terms of plate appearances. And I think, one thing again, people are looking at Phil Dussault and they're like, how did he do it last year, right? If you really break down like some of the ways he was uber successful, his teams that were in the top of the NFBCs, he had a couple. They were all like 99th percentile in plate appearances and 99th percentile in innings pitched. I mean, we talk about the ratios and they're very important, but in the end, I think Roto is a volume game. It is a volume game. And so I think that should be something that guides you in all sorts of places, whether you're doing projections yourself like Rudy, and really trying to nail the inputs into playing time, or you're fabbing guys, or you're just setting lineups throughout the year, a lot of times the breaker, the inflection point needs to be who's getting the most playing time. And it sounds so simple, but the players who do this the best throughout the year are the ones that are having the most success. And I think that's something when you look at players who have had the most success the last couple of years, you know, Casey Chop and Phil, and, you know, some of the other better players that are always there, like Vlad. I mean, these guys nail that consistently. They do it in their drafts, and they also do it setting their lineups. They do it in fab. And that's one takeaway that I kind of want to throw out there is, like, if you nail the playing time and you nail your late round picks, and you don't have to nail a bunch of them, but spend more of your time on the back ends of drafts, guys that you really think are going to pop, guys that you believe in. If you nail those two aspects, you're just way ahead of the game.
Well said.
Concur.
That's it, man. That's it. That's the best advice that we could possibly give. Final thoughts.
And Darwinism.
And Darwinism. Very, very important. Final thoughts here, you guys.
Hey guys, I do have to kick you out. It's about 7 o'clock right now. So
Now we're out
thank
of here.
you so much for this. Darwinism is great. The chat was pointing out I have one called "How Am I Supposed to Butter My Bread with This?" But it's not Darwinism. Darwinism is actually like a word, and that's way more impressive than anything I can just throw letters at. The best I had to think was hipsters, but I think that was not even me. That was a fan and not me, so I can't even take credit for that. So Rudy, I'm very impressed by it, and it's a challenge this year. I will try to find a longer word. I ignored everything else that you guys said, though.
It really wasn't important, honestly.
Good call.
No, seriously though, thank you so much for being a part of this. Really,
It's
that was an
devolution
awesome
from there.
segment. And DVR, Sammy, Rudy, you guys rock. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, you guys.